This is Dr. Rebecca Johansson, running and triathlon coach with the Performance Project. You can find us at theperformance-project.com. Today's sports science mini lecture is on training load, performance, and pacing at the Two Oceans Marathon. This is from my PhD data that I did at the University of Cape Town, and my supervisors were Professor Mike Lambert and Dr. Jeroen Swart. In this study, we followed 69 runners for the 6 weeks leading up to the Two Oceans Marathon, which is a road ultramarathon of 56 Ks in distance, and the race is held in Cape Town. So in this graph, we've got graph A and B, and in graph A, it's a scatter plot, and each data point represents a runner's total training load that they did for the 6 weeks leading up to the race. So on the y-axis, you've got area under the curve, RTSS, and RTSS is a running training stress score, and that was calculated by taking the running duration in hours times the intensity factor squared times 100. And the intensity factor represents how hard a run was, so it would be the speed of the running session in relation to a runner's best 10K race speed. And what we see in graph A is that there's a huge variation in the amount of training done in the 6 weeks leading up to race day for the participant group. So there was no minimum or maximum training requirement to be part of the study. It was anyone who was registered to run this race and who actually completed the race was allowed to be in the study. So it just represents that runners who are doing this race have a really wide range in training load. And in graph B, we plotted how the training changed throughout time. So -6 would be 6 weeks before the race, and -1 on the x-axis would be the 1 week before the race. So we're moving across time by week. And on the y-axis, we've got area under the curve, RTSS. And what we found was, as a group, there's a slight bump up in training load from when we go from -5 to -4. So the 5th week to the 4th week before the race, there's a slight bump, increase in load. And then the training load doesn't decrease until the 1 week before the race. So this would be presumably when the runners are completing their taper before race day. We then looked at the relationships between relative race performance and the area under the curve for training load for the 6 weeks. And relative race performance for each runner was calculated by taking their mean race speed divided by their best 10K race speed. And what we found when we plotted the data points was that there was a significant relationship. So the runners who had better relative race performances had higher training load that they completed for the 6 weeks leading up to race day. However, it's important to take into account that even though we had a significant p-value, the r-squared value was only 0.29. So it's certainly nowhere close to a perfect linear relationship. And to exemplify the variation in the data points, we're just going to take a look at the 2 data points that are circled in blue. The one on the bottom is a runner that had a very good relative race performance of about 90%, and their area under the curve RTSS value was about 2,000. And then when we take a look at the data point circled in blue on the top of the graph, that individual had basically the exact same relative race performance of about 90%, but they had more than double the amount of training load completed in the 6 weeks compared to the blue circle towards the bottom. So 2 individuals that had basically the same relative race performance, but vastly different amount of training that they completed in the 6 weeks before race day. So the adage that each runner is an individual and they should be treated like such in coaching really is exemplified here. And finally, we looked at the relationship between relative race performance and pacing. So on the y-axis, we've got coefficient of variation in pacing as a percentage. So how much did the pacing splits vary with all the splits that we had for the race? And again, what we found was a significant relationship. So the runners with better relative race performances had lower variation in their pacing. And again, just like the relationship between performance and training load, we need to take a look at the R-squared value. It's relatively low, it's 0.34. So there is quite a lot of variation around that relationship, particularly when we're looking at the people who didn't have very good relative race performances. Those data points are very, very widespread. And then as we move to the better performances, it's not quite as spread out. But ultimately, the significant relationship suggests that people with better performances pace more evenly throughout the race, but there is a lot of variation in the relationship.